to the Matson Shooting Academy podcast. If you're a clay target shooter, then we have what you're looking for. Speaking with some of the best in the industry about the game you're passionate about. Subscribe to the Clay Lab on YouTube and follow us on Spotify, Apple Podcast, or your favorite podcast platform. The Matson Shooting Academy podcast is brought to you by Castellani USA, Greenwood Custom Stocks, and Ranger Eyewear. Here's your host, Cody Matson of Matson Shooting Academy.
Hey everybody, welcome to the show. Got a guest on this evening that needs no introduction, but I'm going to go ahead and give him one anyways. Been waiting to get him on the show. A good friend, great coach, longtime mentor, Anthony Matarese Jr. So Anthony, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Well, I had this idea for you and I to talk about all the reasons that we can potentially miss. And I know you spend a ton of time over students' shoulders. And if anybody has seen all the reasons people miss, it would definitely be you.
Yeah, I mean, it's a common thing that obviously someone misses a target, and the most common thing that they think, or especially without any formal training, where was I? Kind of the $1 million question, right? Where was I? So, I mean, if you want me to just start it off, I'll just kind of go through and start with what I think are the most basic things, and some of these are, I've even been an evolution of learning and understanding these myself over years and years of shooting, but also mostly coaching and seeing other people. I think that if we talk about basic form and stance and body movement, it's probably one of the things that causes misses that can then continue to cause misses for years and years and years. I mean, I still have things in my form and stance and body movement that I think still cost me shots, right? After 31 years of competition, just a random miss here or there that, I mounted the gun too low on my shoulder, or moving my head too much during my FITASC mount. So if we talk about form and stance, if you think of that in just kind of the most basic sense, and we can look at a lot of different shooters and people stand different ways. And there are really good shooters that have some limitation in their form or their stance that's probably costing them a shot here or there that they don't realize, or gun mount related to that is, we can throw all this into the same category. So when I look at it, you're essentially, if there's an error there in something that you're doing with your body mechanics, the shot generally seems like it should break. Okay. So if your feet are in the wrong position and you run out of swing, you'll get there and you'll hit the target, but you won't hit them all. Okay. So when I look at like error in kind of general form, stance, body mechanics, like simple gun mount type stuff, I kind of look at it from the perspective that it's like taking a percentage of misses and just posting them that are going to show up on your scorecard. And we don't know where, when, or how many. And it might be 0% today, or it might be 8% another day, if there's some errors within that. So, there's a lot of things just within that category. I grab people and go to turn them, so show them how they're going to move their body, and grab their back shoulder in the front of the gun and turn them, and their feet come up off the ground, right? And I do that. That's if we can't do that, doesn't matter, even what our method is. It doesn't matter how much lead it takes. It doesn't matter what your break point is, your whole point is, because you can't even move your body to get there consistently, right? So that matters, being able to rotate your body, being able to be balanced where you're not too far forward, but not too far back. I've struggled with things in my own shooting, that I pay attention to still in practice, because I didn't really pay attention to them when I was a kid. It was some things I just wasn't taught, right? Or was not something that was emphasized, or didn't stick to me. If I did learn it, I don't remember it, right? So I still kind of go back to those things, because I think even in my own shooting, I can get better. And I feel like I can miss a bird because of some things that I could do better. So movement, balance, being able to get from one point to the other, have some idea of what your foot position should be like. I have to draw a line from my back heel to my front toe. I think a lot of people have their feet too parallel to each other. Okay? If your feet are too parallel to each other, even if you have them lined up in the right direction, your range of motion is smaller. Okay.
Sure.
You can't swing as far left and right with the same foot position, even if it's perfect, right? So when you get to certain pairs, that can be a problem. People get their weight outside their toes too much. They get their weight too much on their back feet. People are mounting the gun way too high in their shoulder. The people mounting the gun way too low in their shoulder. So all of these things I would put in just how the gun is going to end up moving assuming you actually had the right plan, the right hold point, the right break point, the right read of the clay, you can still factor in a percentage of misses on your card if these things are incorrect, right? So,
Sure. So if I can stop you there for a second. So, a lot of people, like we said earlier, they get so caught up in the position of the miss. Okay. So, Joe wound up missing behind that bird, but what you observed is his stance was oriented to his hold point and not his break point. And by the time he got to that break zone, his hips were bound up, he was out of swing, right? And he wound up missing behind, but that's not the root cause of missing behind.
yeah, absolutely. So you can do these things incorrectly, and if you mount the gun way too low in your shoulder, sometimes you're going to shoot over. If your feet are wrong, you can run out of movement. So you can still hit the bird. That's the part that people don't understand is you can do these things to a degree incorrectly and be pretty successful. You might actually be a mid 80s shooter and still doing some of these things incorrectly. Mid 90s shooter, and I'm still doing some of them incorrectly, right? So.
Yeah.
Um, and when I say incorrectly is not exactly perfect all the time, right? So it can cost you a bird here or there. And then if you miss behind it and you ran out of movement, then that's part of the issue. Or if your feet are wrong and people get their stance too wide, then they shift their weight from one side of their body to the other side of their body, then they're rolling their shoulders. You're going to miss off the line of the target. And I start off with this one just because, it's in, it's important. It's one of those variables that, sometimes I get a guy that's like an 85% shooter and I've never given him a lesson before. And his form is, and his body movements and his mount and however, all these factors will put into just the ability to move the gun, assuming he already knows how to hit the clay and he has a general good method, etc. Sometimes the only difference between that guy between 85 and 90 is doing these things correctly, but he's done these things incorrectly for a long time to get to 85, right?
Yes. So it's ingrained.
So then at some point, it's kind of a balancing act of figuring out how much of this can we fix? How much can we leave alone? And even if I have a novice guy and we start off and we're working on all of our form, I believe that all this is really important, but you could spend the whole lesson working on it and then you don't teach the guy anything about just general setup and technique. I like to think of method and technique is how you actually connect and move with the bird. Okay.
Yeah.
Form, okay, and stance and balance and rotation is if I know how to connect and move with the bird, how often am I going to hit it? Okay,
Sure.
meaning that they don't prohibit me or factor in a percentage of misses, right? So when I'm teaching all different levels of shooting, from the very most basic to the from the very from to the some of the most advanced, I'm always kind of balancing my time of teaching them, technique and setup, and we're using this approach to shoot this type of bird, and this is how you connect with the bird and get merge with the bird and get in synchronization. But your form and what you're doing with gun mount and stance is related to that, right? I'm gonna probably get them to hit more birds on the first couple lessons if I don't worry too much about their form. Okay, well then it's gonna
Sure.
catch up. It's gonna catch up with us down the road. Okay, if we ignore it, right? So it's as an instructor, it's a balancing act. And then if I get someone super advanced, even a student that's a regular student that's pretty advanced, and something starts going sideways on their form, and it's the middle of the season, sometimes I don't even mention it to them, right? Because if they have to consciously fix it,
Yeah. That's going to be detrimental to
using
their
them to shoot at
performance.
a high level, they might be better off with a little bit of bad form and their subconscious mind working well than a little bit better form and being so conscious of it they can't shoot a 90 again.
Yeah.
Um, if we go out of that conversation, I think the biggest variable, which is not it's not unrelated to what we talked about, the biggest general reason for missing, which is then related to we can get into a lot of small details related to it, but the most general big picture is gun speed. Okay, so the gun speed in correlation to the bird speed. So where you acquire the clay is part of that. Where your hold point is part of that. The type of approach that you're using to the bird is part of that. The style of the mount can be a part of that. So some form of ability to get the gun speed and the bird speed more or less together at the end of the shot, right? And if we are kind of inclusive to people using a variety of methods, okay, I think when most of the methods that are done successfully are done well, at the end of the shot, the gun speed and the bird speed are very close together.
Yeah.
Even if someone is using a swing through technique, I've shot right behind hundreds, if not thousands of shots with the best guys in the world that are using that method. And when their gun goes off, it's not much very faster than my gun.
Yeah.
So it's just how they get there is different. If someone is using pure maintain lead all the time, and I'm using a little bit of a variety of different approaches, when the gun goes off in that last moment, the gun speed and the bird speed are pretty close together. From what I've observed, by really watching over the gun of a lot of the best people. And I think that's why you can have slightly different techniques and get to the same end result, because the end result basically boils down to the gun and the bird being synchronized and the eyes being on the clay. So there's a lot of misses and we can get into the then little details of that. There's a lot of misses by, shooters of all experience levels that are surprised they missed, or they killed a 5 out of 6, or they killed a 7 out of 8, or they hit it today and same type of bird tomorrow. They missed it 3 out of 4 times. They don't have any idea why. So that gun speed and then all the variables that correlate that. So when the gun speed is incorrect, whether it's too fast or too slow, I generally feel like more experienced shooters probably move the gun too fast.
Too fast. Yeah, for sure.
And less experienced shooter, like, maybe a C-class shooter or less, has times where they're moving the gun too slow. But you can have that guy moving it too fast as well.
Right.
In general, I see a lot more speed being quicker than the clay than I see being slower than the clay.
Yeah. So you touched on the synchronization. So for a shooter that may or may not have ever experienced this, the moment that synchronization happens, that the gun speed and the bird speed truly synchronize at a 1-to-1 ratio, it almost as if, right, the bird perceives to slow down, right? And if you're not achieving that latch or that synchronization, right, if everything's just in fast forward to you, you're not achieving that synchronization. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I mean, that's I was working with a guy just at the end of the day today, and the guy's he's really good. He's hunted his whole life since he's a little kid, and shot like a lot. He was a little kid hunting and doing a little bit of skeet or trap, and then got in the clays a little bit, and then got back out. And he just got back into it, and he's only like C class, and he's like shooting 85 and 90, and he's like, I was only 2 birds off the winner, and he means 2 birds off the winner in the tournament.
Yeah.
In the tournament up in Connecticut or somewhere, so. And he's like, these birds killed me. These are the ones that killed me. These quartering shots. It was the second bird of the pair, and it was off to the side about right here. It didn't even look that hard, and I missed 13 out of the 16 birds I missed were very similar to that, right? So all right, let's shoot it. Let's see what you're doing. And this guy can shoot extremely well. I mean, I can get him out. He's a very talented shooter for the limited experience that he has. For sure, he shoots the first bird. He's a little late to catch the bird coming out on the second one with his eyes. He then is thinking that, like, for the second shot, he needs a hold point. So he's late to see the bird. Then he's going to like a hold point. Then he sees the bird, and then, sometimes he's connected in front of it. Sometimes he's connected behind it, but his first move is really fast. Then the bird feels fast and he just kind of goes, either from the front of it or the back of it, but triggers the shot early and never gets any opportunity for the target to slow down. So the bird feels a million miles an hour to him, and it's just a decent quartering bird. It's not, it's one that's enough time that if I looked at it, I'd be like, if I just see it come out, my plan, given, all the mechanics are kind of under control. If I just see it come out and move with it, all I got to do is look at it. I got plenty of time, right? He's feeling really fast. So that's the lack of synchronization, but that starts with some variables of he's late to move his eyes. Then if you can find the bird with your eyes, then on that second shot quartering bird, I don't really think of like an exact hold point. You're seeing it and going that way, but you should see it soon enough that the gun goes to the bird. You don't need a hold point, right? You're not stopping. You're going from bird 1 to bird 2 and connecting to that clay. So he's late to see it, then late to connect to it, So he's missing that early part of the shot. Then when he realizes that, he takes off fast. Okay. So it essentially boils down to he's just not in sync with the bird. Okay.
Yeah.
As soon as I got him to find it, get the gun and the bird moving together and merge with it, some form of blending of the speed. And I even said, look, I want you to be with the target. And with the target is between the front edge and slightly behind it on this clay. If you can get with it, you're going to feel it. Okay. And then all you need to do is, as you feel with it, you're going to get a chance to get a good look at it. But if the bird doesn't synchronize and that bird doesn't slow down a little bit, you can't even focus on it. Okay. So that's one of the reasons why people don't understand focus on the clay, is they read an article or they take a lesson, but they don't truly understand how to get connected with the bird. The bird never feels slow often enough times for them to really grasp the idea of focusing on the target, which focusing on the target, we can come back to as another reason why people miss.
A big one.
I feel like focusing on a target, though, is like the last skill that you kind of really, you can think of it two ways. There's people that say, well, shouldn't we really just learn to focus on the target first? I could follow that, but really, I think you have to be skilled with gun handling, before your focus on the target kind of really matters. I could make the argument that, well, if I can just teach you to look at the bird in the beginning, then you get a little gun control, maybe you'll be better at looking at the target. Yeah, maybe, but I'm not sure how long you're going to just look at the bird without understanding how to get any control or synchronization. I'm not sure when we start this journey, when the process works to understand all the form and stance and balance and method and technique and hold points and how to synchronize with the target. So, back to the big picture, gun speed. So why do people not have the gun speed and the bird speed together? Their hold points either too close or too far out. They're not seeing the clay come out to move. They're moving too late, or they're moving too fast when it comes out. I'm a firm believer you need some kind of a merging mechanism, whether it's the gun out of your pocket or unmounted for crossing and incoming and stuff with time to transition, that if you can synchronize your hands. I like to be out of the gun because both of my hands are moving, and I'd rather not use this soft mount if I have a lot of time. But if you are using a soft mount, you're merging with bringing the gun into your face and a little bit more of your front hand. All my going away stuff is obviously more of a mounted gun, but then I feel like in a mounted gun situation, all synchronization comes from hold points and eye position and moving on the motion and blend of that speed into your barrel, so that you start off slower than the bird, and by the time the bird connects to you, it's the speeds between the bird and the gun have become the same, so you start off going 1 mile all the way until that bird gets to whatever speed it's going. If the bird leaves the trap going 20, by the time you connect to it, it's not going 20 anyway.
Right.
So you're speeding up and it's slowing down. Okay. And when they're finally together, that's how I'm merged and connected to that bird, in a mounted gun situation. And unmounted gun situation, it's similar, but I'm using my hands and my body together to get that gun and that bird moving together.
Yeah. And that gun mount, I mean, I see, I'll say more youth shooters, they're starting mounted for some long incoming target, right? And that just makes it feel like that much longer that it's taken that bird to get to them. And if they dismount, they can be active with both hands. And I don't think what they don't realize is there's magic in that mount, right? That mount, you're using the time in that mount to get the gun speed matched to the bird speed. And by the time you're finishing that mount, and you're bringing in the focus, you can go ahead and take that shot. So yeah, there's definitely value in getting that gun down and out of the pocket for that synchronization.
Yeah, I mean, you need something, right? I mean, look, there's some guys shoot really extremely well and they leave the gun in the shoulder and get the gun out of their face, and they've got some type of blend in to meet the bird from holding under the line generally, kind of the front hand coming up to connect with the target. But there's got to be some type of timing,
Something.
on whether, and there's different ways that you do it in a mounted gun situation if the person has to use a mounted gun for whatever reason. In certain shots, we have to use a mounted gun, but
Absolutely.
you're still have some merging mechanism of that gun speed and that bird speed matching together. And there's a lot of it is that you have to learn how to move with the bird right away. So if the bird gives you more time, you have time, but I still move with the bird right away. And when it comes out, I'm moving. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Whether I have, 50 yards of flight or I'm shooting it right off the trap. Then what that means on that's where the vision and the acquisition and how you use your eyes changes and matters, because if that bird's a quartering shot and it seems fast to you coming out, or the way you're looking. And I think this is a little bit personal, okay, but some kind of understanding what you're doing. If I'm shooting unmounted, how I look for the clay is a lot different than when I'm shooting pre-mounted. So how I see the target come out and how then my hands start is related to synchronization. So back to the big picture, all these variables can cause you to be out of sync with gun speed. Whole point too close, whole point's too far out. You're moving too fast when it comes out. You're moving too slow when it comes out. You don't see it come out. Okay. You're going to be able to hit plenty of these shots. Okay. None of this list of things that I'm telling you that could be correct is going to prohibit you from hitting birds. Okay. But it's going to prohibit you from hitting all of them. Okay. So that's where the miss comes in. That's kind of a mystery. If you can't believe you missed it, I tell people this all the time, right? And I tell myself this all the time, and I still don't follow my own advice, right? If you can't believe you missed it, okay, and you saw the clay well, your gun speed is incorrect. Okay.
That's a great tool to decode that.
I missed a bird. I practiced 3 days after work for an hour and a half in a row this week. I hadn't shot since the Jack Links, and I had a couple things I was specifically working on. I had a very good idea, something I was doing incorrect, and it was related to gun speed on some quartering trap style shots. And then they got in my head, and I shot okay at the Jack Links with one massive technical error that I was doing, and then whatever mental errors that came with that. So I actually felt I was shooting extremely well, as good as I've shot in my lifetime. Okay, just had a hole in my game, and then that caused my mental game to suck. And so I was practicing this week, and I was practicing this slow knuckleball crossing shot, kind of quartering, and I'm working on being slow and connected to it and seeing it well, and my movement is pretty solid, and I've been shot like the day before I shot phenomenal, as good as I can shoot. And I kill this thing a couple of times and miss it twice, and I'm like, God, man, that thing should break. Okay, next one, say, all right, let me make sure I get a good look at it, see it well. There's nothing else wrong that I'm doing. Miss it again. I'm like, my gun's got to be too fast. Okay, I don't feel that at all, though. Okay, not one, could not really feel it. Okay, I mean, sometimes I do, but on that really slow shot, and on that bird being just a knuckleball at 35 yards crossing, I mean, it's just an outlier. I think it's my subconscious part of my brain just wants to move it faster than the bird.
Yeah.
I don't even think that I really had anything, there wasn't anything that I was actually doing that massively wrong, right? But you can still have that. You can still have that error, and that's just a little bit of the bird being a tough shot.
Yeah. I mean, some of those birds that, off speed and things like that. I mean, we're so used to shooting, big, large lead stuff with a bunch of speed and everything. When you get that off speed, I don't know what that is, but it seems like we have some built-in lead that we want to apply to that bird. And when it takes less than we perceive, it's hard to slow down and get that speed sync. But I know what you're talking about.
I think your brain just wants to move the gun sometimes at an average, right?
Yeah.
Plus, it's got an equation in there for what it's normally doing, plus or minus a little bit. And when it's way outside of that, the bird's far enough away that it doesn't take that much of an error to miss it.
That's right.
It's like being slightly off on a 15-foot golf putt,
Yeah.
You're close, just don't go in.
That's right. No, that's definitely a good one. So covering the fundamentals of that, the gun speed and everything, what else do you see that's generally a glaring reason for missing?
I mean, so then you get into, reading, so I like to put reading the target and planning, reading the target and planning and kind of being able to be rehearsed and ready to get into that box. As another one, and it's got all kinds of levels in terms of the understanding of that, like how I'll be able to go from this is what the bird's doing. I've read the angle, the speed, the distance, the line, and how much time I have. Okay. So those are the variables I'm always looking at. This is my plan for how to set up for it, where I'm going to kill it, break point, hold point, type of mount, all that stuff. Okay. So we can already make a lot of errors before we get through that list, right?
Oh yeah, for sure.
So if the person doesn't understand what they're looking at for the variables of reading the bird, we can have a problem if they're not understanding what it means for the time frame that you have to shoot that bird, and then what type of approach you need. And then taking that from something that you've even done it well, read the bird, you have the experience to hit those shots, that, rehearsing that. I see this one a lot, right? So just in the last, I was just telling you, I've literally been giving lessons, after I'm going to go to the Gator Cup on Wednesday, and it'll be, 26 days in a row with like a half a day that I cook lunch at our lodge. So I've seen a lot of people and a lot of good shooters, in the
Yeah.
3 weeks, 3.5 weeks, and we have some really good targets set up right now on our advanced course. Like it's like a good tournament, at a big shoot, and there's 19 or 20 stands of that. 3, 4 traps on some stage, 4 traps on some station. So a lot of targets that are very doable, but you better plan it right, read it right, and you better execute right too. Okay.
Very little margin for error.
You've got to do it all right. And I've seen 3 or 4 very good shooters. I've seen 3 or 4 very good shooters walk up on some. I know their abilities to hit the birds is there. I know their read of the targets is there. And they kind of look at them, and I can just watch how they view the birds. I'm like, all right, you ready to see them? Yeah. Like, you want to see one more? Yeah, sure. Okay, all right. Yeah, I'm ready. Pull, lost dead. Pull, lost dead, and, we got a quartering tower or something. I'm like, what did you plan to do on that second bird? Like, I know this guy can hit it. Okay, I know I've seen him hit that type of stuff before. I know what he's capable of. Uh, and I think it's the plan is a little vague, the rehearsal is a little vague, and say this quartering tower that I'm talking about, one of them takes 4 times, one's a slow tower, and the other one's, we're talking about the trap's 35 yards and tower's 60 foot up and ripping full spring, like I'm planning to be connected way ahead of this bird. Okay.
Yeah.
Outside the box. When I get in the box, I'm trying to look at the bird and shoot it. Okay. But I'm rehearsing, how I'm going to hit that bird. It's not. I said, what was your difference between your plan from the one bird to the other bird? And I kind of get like a little bit of, well, I know it's faster. Like, well, that's not. You have to. So lack of basically taking the information, using it, planning it, but then showing yourself what that's going to look like and how you're going to do that, so that your subconscious mind is ready if you're at that level of shooting. So that's a big one. I've seen that. I've seen that this.
So just lack of thoroughness in the plan, maybe taking it for granted or just kind of lightly, really not.
Yeah, or even just doing it the same level that they would do it if the birds were a little bit, more everyday user friendly, that they get away with.
Yeah.
I feel like I always say, I'm like, look, if the bird doesn't take much lead and gives you plenty of time, as long as you look at the bird, you probably hit it. With some of these guys that are pretty talented and shot a good amount, but that ain't gonna work. Okay, on you start getting in this, regional level targets, or going to the Gator Cup next week. I doubt you're just gonna walk up to most of the stands and just get in there and call pull and do real well.
Right.
You're going to have to pay attention, right? Then that gets to where, now people have to balance thinking versus not thinking too much and overthinking it. People will say, I'm overthinking it. I've heard that a lot before. Well, when you're learning, you're going to be overthinking it, right? It comes with the territory. Your other option is don't think about it and do the wrong thing.
Yeah. Double-edged sword there.
That's a balance. So that's one, but I think the elementary part of that, for more I kind of use an example of some pretty high level guys that still made the mistake. But then if we take that to the guy that's shooting his first tournaments and working up, you have to be able to know what to do when you step up to the stand to read those birds. And again, I think you can be kind of off on some of that, and depending on the degree of difficulty, hit some birds, right? Because then maybe your plan is just not as good as it could be. You haven't chosen the kind of a right approach and how to set up for it. So you can get away with that, right? I kind of jokingly say, you're shooting a shotgun, right? You can do quite a bit wrong and still hit 60 or 70%. right?
Yeah.
Hitting 60 or 70% does not mean you're on your way to hitting 85%. Okay. It means sometimes probability got you 60 or 70%, and you better be glad to get it if you
Yeah.
if you're doing some things incorrectly. So I think that's important, is to for people to evaluate. Sometimes I'll just step out in front of the cage after people have shot 3 or 4 pairs, and I talk to them a little bit, but they're not really like, all right, what are you going to do here? We're just practicing right now. We're not shooting for a score, but we need to know what we're going to do, or we're not going to get to the point where we're ready to shoot for a score and do well. So, I mean, I think truly knowing that part is, I mean, one of the things that I do really well as an instructor, especially when I get that middle experience. The guys got some pretty good form and pretty good mechanics. One thing I do really well as an instructor is teach them how to have a super solid plan on every type of bird, right? Like my guy, my go-to for for having a successful lesson and taking some B class guy to double A quickly is, evaluate his form, make sure it's decent. If it's not perfect, write him a few notes down. Don't get stuck on it too long. Give him some videos to go say, hey, watch this, watch that. You better practice this at your house. So I'm not spending the next 2 hours teaching you where to put your feet. Okay. So
Right.
you can do that yourself. Okay. But you're doing here. See this video? Give me your phone. Okay. This is what you got to look like. Okay. Get to work when you go home. Okay. Get on YouTube, watch the top 40 guys at the nationals, and, at least be able to stand in there with them and not look like an outlier.
Yeah.
And then, my go-to is go through as many types of targets as possible. Okay. To teach them how to play the game and set up and what the approach is at all those birds, from reading it to this, to that, to that's what you need to know. So I think a lot of people don't have the knowledge of reading the bird and making the plan, knowing the nuances of the game of, okay, you get to this shot and you better shoot this one faster than you thought, or you're not going to get to that second bird. And we got a double trap and you got to spot shoot that first one because it's pretty extreme. And, then we got a raboo, and on a raboo, I just spent the last hour telling you, don't look at the barrel. Okay. And now I'm on a raboo and I tell you got to see your gun more. Okay. And then we go to a slow crosser and I got you connecting with the bird and making sure you're close to it, and don't just bring the gun up and fire, and then I take you to a ripping quarter and away chandelle and I want you to stick the gun a mile out in front of it and pull the trigger, so, kind of knowing that that's what the birds required you to do, all within a basis of still having control of the bird the best that you can. So I think there's a lot of misses there. And that list of misses of what happened is, if the person misses behind or in front, or they missed over the top of it, some of that is simply related to reading the bird. Some of that is simply relating to planning the shot better. If you recognized a really fast bird, but you didn't make a move, some type of connection with the clay to put you in front of the target, then there's a good chance you can be behind it. Okay.
Yeah.
Sometimes, the classic one is like a two birds off the tower, one's fast, one's slow, pair of crossers, and the guy's shooting behind the second bird, and he goes, why do you think I'm behind it? I mean, you're not far enough in front of it. But, that's the main reason you're behind it. But
Yeah.
what did you plan to do? And I'm not asking you to tell me about planning what the lead looked like per se. But if you didn't differentiate between the two and come up with some type of plan, and then if you're planning, oh, I'm going to lead the first one by 8 foot and the first one by 2 feet, that ain't right either.
Right.
Okay. Now you're worrying just about the lead, right? So
Yeah.
we got to learn how to feel that out, and understand that, there's some basis to get ready to lead a target. Have a good part of your lead that is just from your hands and your eyes. It's kind of putting all that together, which, I kind of threw it together as all one thing. And we could say, well, people miss because they do this. I think it's kind of more of, it's like one topic, right?
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's definitely. And I think, in a summary of that, you could say a novice or maybe even intermediate shooter, they just react to the situation in front of them. But an advanced shooter, everything's scripted, right? They kind of know exactly how that's going to go. So there's really no surprises. They've read the line, they know all of that. But I mean, yeah, you just watch the sheer panic from not having, a thorough and accurate plan, right? It's just pure reactionary, or the plan deviates between pairs, right? Go dead pair on the first one and everything changes on the second one, right? That's a big,
Yep.
Things are moving.
Yeah, doing the same thing each time, but I think some of that is they didn't know what the same thing was.
Right.
I think
Yeah.
I think that's part of it, right? It's like, sometimes people say, well, I change, or I even shoot it faster or slower. Yeah, but I think that's just that's lack of rehearsal before you got in there.
Sure,
It
sure.
just, you deviate from what you did on bird one to bird two, because on pair one to pair two, because you didn't know what you're going to do on pair one.
Yeah.
I always say, even if the birds are easy and basic, you still want a thorough plan that you've laid out and rehearsed for that station. And then
Yeah.
if you're doing all these things correctly, or on your journey. So I'm a firm believer in, as you're learning and you're working your way up and you're trying to get better, you're going to be pretty conscious, right? Um, you know, if you're a couple years in and you got all these tough birds out there, you're not going to step into the cage and probably be that successful being purely subconscious, because your subconscious doesn't have it yet. Okay. So then if you're more conscious, now it's harder to get away from your process, and it's harder to get away from being aware of the gun and what the gun's doing with the process. There's a lot of misses then related to not looking at the clay, but the shooter often, depending on their level, the lower the level is, the reason they're not looking at the bird is because they're trying to get the process correct.
Yeah. Their conscious mind's consumed with the process.
So, we can look at it two ways. We can say, well, just get to the tournament and you're gonna be as good as you are when you get there. Don't try to get any better once you get there. Just go out there and have a routine and look at the bird. And I think that works to a degree, but when he gets to that bird that he really has to think his way through it to hit it, I think that shot sometimes, depending on the level, has to be done a little bit more conscious, and just work hard to watch the clay so you ignore the process, depending on your level. And as your level goes up, you're going to be more and more subconscious. And I think your ability and your ability to watch the target and truly remain focused on the clay gets a lot higher. I mean, there's a lot of misses that are just the last part of the shot, the feel part of the shot, looking at the bird. I go out and practice still to this day looking at the target, okay, because that's the last part of my shot. That's the part that's going to, finish the shot. And no matter how good I think I am at it, it's still a discipline, and it's still something I have to do. And it's still something that goes wrong under pressure. And watching the clay through pulling the trigger is extremely difficult, and if it's extremely difficult for me, it's really difficult then for most other people, because I've been doing this for a long time. Okay. And I think that there's a lot of misses there at all levels. Okay. Some of that being almost by definition, if you're learning and you lose your confidence a little bit, you're going to take your eye off the bird. You're going to see the process. You're going to get a little conscious and aware of what's going on. You're not going to look at the target. But if you know that's likely to go on, then you can question that part of why you missed it, right? If you made a really good move with the bird or whatever your method was, and you missed one in the last pair, and you felt like everything was right, and nothing seemed off, then there's a good chance if it's on that last pair, you get a little bit nervous, you're trying a little bit too hard, you take your eye off the target, right? But if you miss that bird and your buddy goes, you're behind it, okay, that doesn't necessarily mean that you didn't give it enough lead, right? That can't be it. You hit it the two times prior. Okay.
Right. The lead.
One of the best ones that I see all the time, and I ask people, I ask people the question just to get them thinking, you get on a double trap pair going away. You have to be able to shift your eyes and point the gun at the bird. Okay. So it's a looking at the bird shot. Find the bird, point the gun at the bird, and look at the bird. And if they're hard enough, you're not going to be able to know if I was dead on it or on the bottom edge or the front edge or the top edge. You've got to be able to look at the bird and point the gun there. Okay. There's no method. Okay. The method is what you do with the eyes and if you can point the gun. That's it. Okay. If it's slower and closer, yeah, you can control it a little bit. If it's further and faster, you're getting there and shooting. Okay. To me, it's matters how much time I have, just dictates how well I can see the clay. Or how well I can't, how I can't, that I can't see it for very long.
Yeah.
Trying to see it the best that I can, given the time to that. But people miss on that type of pair all the time. Generally, it's what they did on the first shot, or it's not moving their eyes, or it's not pointing their gun. And they'll go dead pair, dead lost, or dead pair, dead lost. And that's the classic shot that it's right there in front of them, so they can't believe they missed it, but it's out there 35 yards hanging. They go, now, did I shoot over that? Okay. And I'm like, I don't know. When you shot at the one before and you hit it, did you shoot lower? Okay. Well, I don't know. So if I told you you shot, if you told you shot high, you're telling me you have enough time to do everything you're supposed to do, go up there and intentionally shoot lower, okay, and still point the gun, without being careful and measuring, etc. So if it's a hands and eyes and pointing, that's where the miss comes from. It doesn't really have anything to do with in front or over, under your, and even if you did miss over, you know that now after you missed, okay?
Yeah,
So
past tense.
it's not going to be useful, okay? If you want to run the station in a tournament, you've got to be able to get there to that bird and have that skill set to be able to move the eyes correctly, get the gun there, see the bird for whatever amount of time you have, and point the gun, and your brain's got to know where the gun's going and get there if it's that quick double. Shooting lower, after you miss, number one, the problem is you already missed, okay? So you didn't run the station, okay? And number two, every time you go to one of these, they're going to be a little bit different anyway. It's not that the next one you could go to could be rising more, okay? So
Sure.
shooting lower doesn't mean anything. So it's kind of the classic shot that I see a lot, and that's the one. It seems so easy. It's just sitting right there, and it's hard to, there's a number of things that are difficult about that shot to me. But most people think it's easy because it's just sitting right there in front of them, and the first shot generally dictates the pair. But I think that's the classic one of, like, people really want to know where they missed that and why they missed it. But I think the ability to run that station is that you can move the eyes and you point the gun at the bird and you are looking at the clay and you don't really pay that much attention to exactly where the barrel is, and your brain can get it there.
Yeah, it's more on your ability to point, right? I mean, just you're gonna craft that over time. You're gonna get better, smoother, quicker,
Yeah.
all those things, and you might just have a little bit of glitch in your movement that you got to work out.
I just think that calling pull the next time, like in that situation, trying to be in a different position than you were the last time is not the answer, right?
No, yeah, no, that's really good. You said it a little bit earlier too, right at the end of the shot, right? Not seeing the bird at the end of the shot. I think, I observed so many times that a shooter winds up sharing their vision at the end of the shot, bird gap gun or whatever ratio it is. But that's the moment of truth, right? That's when, you're about to fire and you need that focus on the bird the most then. And that's where the eyes start detach and drift into the lead, maybe get a little more conscious of that gun. And that's just a learned thing as well, right? To be able to
Yeah, I
trigger.
think there's two things that happen. Like, so I used to, when I was less experienced, I would definitely say at the end of my shot, get nervous, careful, the bird's just out there far enough pressure on. I would, like, measure, see the space, try to make something kind of perfect, see the relationship more. I don't do that much anymore, but what I will do is, and it's almost probably like a lot of people do this, it's almost like a response that my brain knows, hey, at the end of the shot, don't get careful, don't let your eyes leave the clay. I'll just kind of quit looking at it now. Okay. Like, it's like a fight or flight response to, like, at that last moment, if the pressure's on me, my eye will just leave the clay. So I remember seeing it well, and I don't remember, like, seeing the gun. Okay.
Mm,
But I remember seeing it well because I saw it well up until the last moment. Okay. And it's like a fight or flight response that my brain's basically saying, hey, get the hell out of here before you get careful. Okay. So it kind of quits in that, with 1% of the shot left.
yeah.
And if my move felt good, and I don't feel like there's anything wrong, then the only way I know I'm doing that is just assuming. I can't actually, I don't get any real good feedback. Okay. That I don't get any real good feedback that at the end of my shot, I wasn't looking at the bird. I would actually tell you, no, I remember seeing it pretty well. Okay.
Yeah.
But I can only remember the whole duration of that occurred for me. If I bailed out with 1% and left, I can't remember that. It didn't exist for me.
Sure.
So yeah, I mean, that last part of the shot of seeing the target and building a discipline to that, which is something everyone should be working on. And it's going to be the part that stops the less experienced people from getting careful and measuring and overthinking. And, my response to everything when I was learning to shoot regarding, anything that could go wrong. Okay. Mentally nervous, careful, first station, last pair, first pair, last pair, first day of the tournament, last day of the tournament. My response to all of that was just look at the bird. Okay. That's really all I knew. Okay.
Yeah.
And that was, a massive advantage to do that. So I think if I knew a few other things, about routine and mindset, et cetera, I, would have won a few more, titles or something in my first 10 or 15 years, probably, but I probably wouldn't have developed the visual part of the game that I developed either, because I relied on that. My mental game was look at the clay for 15 years, so that's it. Right.
Yeah. That was ingrained for sure.
That was what I learned, right? So that's definitely looking at the bird is definitely a reason there's a lot of misses. But a lot of people could be listening to this and they can't really quite get their mind around that, right? So, if they've got some technical errors or they're not in sync with the bird or the bird's not slowing down, there's somebody listening to this right now. I always look at the bird, right?
See every bird I shoot at.
Right. I always look at it like, so that's not what we're talking about, right? We're talking about a different level of understanding, saying if I don't do it all the time. And, I think it's something that in my shooting that the discipline of doing that and understanding and just the conversation, it's a big part of my success, but it's a big part of my failure if I don't do it right. Okay.
Yeah.
And I think just understanding that, that this is something that I have to be aware of and understand and practice and train is part of the reason why it's a big part of my success. I think that there's a lot of really good shooters that do it well when they're doing it well, right?
Yeah,
and,
exactly.
and looking at the clay is pretty easy when things are going well. It's like a ball rolling down a hill, right? It just goes. But when it's not, it's pretty tough.
Yeah. Yeah. And yeah, your emotional state, fear, all those things are going to factor into how easy it is to look at the clay or not.
Yep.
Yeah. Oh, that's great. Well, I think we've given a lot of good things, food for thought here for people to to think about differently, in their post shot routine. And that's something that maybe we can kind of bring this home with in your post shot routine when that miss happens. You've given some things to help decode that miss, right? Because the person that can fix their misses the quickest that day, generally that's your winner. So do you run a post shot routine every time? Do you only run it on a miss? What is your take on that?
So when I'm practicing, I play back what happened every single time, every single pair that I shoot. I can tell you, if you said, "Hey, was that good? Was that bad? What could you have done better?" I'll play it back, pretty much every pair. Okay, and I always go off of what it felt like, right? So if I'm giving someone a lesson, I ask them a million times, "Did you feel that? What did that feel like? Did you feel that?" So I need them to be able to take a feeling, and that has to mean something, right? That's your instant replay is what it felt like. Yeah, you can try to play back what you saw, okay, but I think what you felt is, what you saw and what you felt are definitely you need both, okay? And I think what you felt is more important. So you start to learn what something felt like when it was correct or incorrect in practice. In a competition, more so in my shooting now than ever, if things are going well and I'm shooting pretty good, I try not to have much post shot unless I miss. So, if I hit a bird and I get the feedback of something is off, if that feel to me is something enough off to actually cause a miss, then I'm gonna make a little bit of an adjustment. Okay. But if that feel to me is not perfect but good enough to get out of there, then I'm basically making a calculated decision of, you know, the more I evaluate what happened, the more likely I am to be too conscious. The less I evaluate what happened, the more likely I am to stay subconscious and just trust myself and get through there and shoot the birds. So I'm essentially banking on that my post shot in practice of evaluating what I did and doing something better and doing something better and doing something better basically has got me as good as I'm going to be that day. Okay. Now, as good as I'm going to be that day is different than somebody else as good as they're going to be that day. Okay. So, what happened in between shots, if they think they need to make a correction based on what they saw or what they felt to hit the next one, even if they hit the first pair, I generally like to stay out of my own way if I'm breaking the targets in competition.
Yeah.
If I missed, okay, if I missed in a tournament and I'm going to evaluate, there's a few things that go through my mind. If I had already hit the bird, it's not pair one, so I kill the first pair, then I miss. Okay. I almost never do anything different except look at the clay better the next time. Okay. Because I'm basically banking on my plan was right. I hit the first pair. Now I've missed on the second or third pair, and I've got one more pair or two more pairs. I can't be that far off, okay, if I hit the first pair. So if I did something that just seemed way off, sometimes I do something because I just, made some type of a bad body movement or something, whatever. I moved too much or too fast or didn't look back quite far enough, So if I know I didn't look back far enough, then I'll look back further the next time. But, if it felt pretty good, like nothing was blaring, then my post shot's just going to be get the next clay better. Okay.
Yeah.
If I missed on the first pair, and I can't believe I missed it, right? Then I'm evaluating my read of the clay or I'm evaluating my gun speed. If I shot a big stalling bird or something, big stalling crosser, big stalling midi, and I missed it on the first shot, and I feel like, God, that should have broke. Okay. Then that next time when I'm shooting that bird, once I'm connected with it, I feel like I'm really, really, really like holding the bird in my right hand. Okay. If I'm really holding the bird in my right hand, then my body stays a little bit slower with the target. So if I feel like it should have broke and I don't want to change, giving it more or less or my insertion point, then I'm going to look at it really hard and try to do something that I know can match the speed better, but without thinking about matching the speed. Okay. I'm not going to come up to it and be like, all right, my gun was too fast, because that's not going to work in the middle of a tournament. It's too conscious. But if I can connect with the bird and then for me feel that bird in my right hand, that keeps my front hand kind of out of it, through the shot, I'm assuming that that's going to, was gun speed and, my body and my right hand will slow my gun down. If I, had a, felt pretty good or felt, if the bird, I feel when I'm behind more than I feel when I'm in front. Okay. So if I miss behind it, I get some feedback. If I miss in front of it, I don't really know why the fuck I missed it sometimes. Right.
Yeah.
But then I know that that's what that means. Right. So it didn't feel like anything, but if that's what it felt like, then a lot of times that's when I'm in front. But that's why you got to know yourself a little bit, right? I take a lot of shooting big targets the last couple of weeks with a lot of D class to AA shooters, right? That group of people on my course right now, they're shooting behind the birds. Okay. If I tell you, throughout a 2-hour lesson that you need to get connected further in front of the clay when you mount your gun, then, it's unlikely that if you're shooting on that type of bird next week that you're shooting in front too often.
Right.
Possible,
Right.
but it's not likely, right? So now I've got to make an educated guess, but that educated guess has to be partly based upon what I see. I mean, I don't really feel like so as an instructor, you hear people say, I shot over that, right? I shot over that. I see people shoot over if their gun's set up too high. I lowered a kid's comb yesterday. Okay. Uh, Kid shoot pretty damn good, but I seen him the first two stands miss right over the top of the bird a few times that he made a good shot. The gun's going higher than he thinks it is.
Yeah.
And we took one spacer out and he got bigger and his face is thicker and he shot better with it for sure. But I rarely see people miss over the top as an actual like misjudgment of the bird. Okay. I see people miss over the top because they're doing something incorrect, right? Back to their form or their gun mount or, whatever it might be, So I see way more misses under as a misjudgment than I do over. Okay. I see people miss over, but misses over to me is something else is wrong. Okay, point's wrong. Generally something your mount is wrong, your gut fit is wrong. But I see a lot of misses under as a misreading of the target. Like you walk on that first pair and you miss. I see all the big high towers missed under.
Hmm.
Unless they're going down. But most, if they're going flat, they're missed under. I mean, behind often, but under a lot. A lot of big sky shots that are kind of climbing. I see missed under. So you got to know what there's a lot of people that I tell them that they missed under a bird, and they go, "Man, I must have been missing a lot of these under because I miss birds like this all the time." And I always thought I was over. So you got to be real careful about making assumptions that you don't know.
Right. Or listening to your buddy behind you calling out the wad.
Just an assumption, you got to be careful of that, right? So my post shot is every time in practice, not that much when I'm hitting them unless my feel is blaring. Like I know I got to feel feedback right away of what it felt like. So I mean, you could say that I have a post shot, but if I don't get a feel that's wrong, that post shot in my mind lasted, quarter of a second because what do I evaluate? Why do I need it every time if it feels great? Just if
do it again.
Off a little bit, then it just depends on how much off it feels. And if it feels off a little bit and I don't want to open up my mind to thinking that, I just keep rolling with it. And if it's on the first pair, and I'm surprised, then I go through some of the things we just talked about.
Yeah, no, that's great. That's super valuable information because tapping into the art side of the game, tapping into the feel. I mean, so much of this is feel, right? It has to be feel, because it's not 8 feet, 10 feet. You gotta feel that space. Well, I know I've taken up a bunch of your evening, and sincerely appreciate you getting on the podcast. And I think we gave folks listening a ton of good things to think about, and it's going to generate a lot of good conversation. So thank you for your time.
I think it'll be well received, and I'm glad to get on here with you.
Awesome. Well, thanks, Anthony. I look forward to catching up. We'll see you at the Gator Cup, and good luck there to you, and crush them.
Take care, man.
Thanks for joining us. Remember to subscribe on YouTube and your favorite podcast platform to the Clay Lab so you don't miss an episode. Check out MatsonShootingAcademy.com or reach out to Cody at MatsonShootingAcademy@gmail.com. Consider joining as a channel member too by clicking that join button below on YouTube for early access to videos and podcasts. We'll catch you here next time on the Matson Shooting Academy podcast.